Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video I'm going to do something I've not done before, and that's get all the audio gear that I can remember owning, everything I've got now plus stuff I've owned in the past, into a tier list. Should be a really fun video. I've had a really busy couple of weeks, so I thought I'd do something nice and fun to get me back into it, because I want to do a week of making videos before I go off on tour for 2 months. So yeah, let's get stuck into a tier list. Okay, so first on the list I've got an Akai A3000. Actually, I think I had the, was it the XL one? That is the one there that I had, the A3000, was the S3000XL. Anyway, that was a sampler, and I used to use that back in the day before you could trigger stuff off easily from the computer using a software sampler, because the computers just weren't fast enough to cope with all of that. I used to use it, I had a little floppy disk with a load of drum samples on it that I would use for bass drum, snare drum and toms for triggering. It was a very functional bit of gear, but an absolute nightmare to use compared to today's software samplers. So I don't know, some of my choices here and the way I grade these are going to be based on nostalgia, because there's things that I absolutely love that are not A tier, but I want to put them in the A tier, and then there's stuff that should be A tier, but it's just, in my experience, they were a pain in the arse. So I think I'm going to put this one in B tier. It's a classic bit of gear and it's very good for its time, but I kind of came in with it just as we were changing over, and I much preferred working in the box, so I never kind of looked at it fondly. So I'm putting that in B tier. So the next one up on the list is the Alesis ADAT. I had a couple of these. I used to hire them in and ended up owning one of them when I was a teenager to record my school band. And when they worked, they were great. I mean, they didn't sound particularly wonderful. They were just sort of quite harsh, old school digital recorders. I had tapes chew up a few times, which was annoying. Sometimes when you had two of them and you wanted to sync them, that was really annoying. But they did lead to the Alesis ADAT protocol, which is what, you know, I'm still using that today, the ADAT protocol, to transmit my 24 ins and outs for my hardware inserts. So I'm going to put that as a C tier product. I don't really think it set the world on fire as a multi-track recorder, but a lot of good came from it. So let's put it in there. Okay, so the next one is my old Fostex G24S tape machine. And that was the last tape machine I used before we moved over to digital. It was good. It sounded fairly good. I did loads of good recordings on that I can still listen to. At some point I'm going to do a mix review video going back to my mixes and recordings I did when I was 20 something and even sort of 19, and some of the late teens and early 20s stuff was done on that tape machine, and it was very good and very usable. There were better tape machines out there, but it did some really good recordings that I still listen to now and say that was a good bit of gear. I'm going to put that in the B tier because it's not superb, but it was more than usable. The next one is my old Tascam MSR-16 tape machine, which was a 1/2-inch 16-track reel-to-reel. That was definitely noisier and more fiddly than the Fostex. And I liked it. I mean, it was nice at the time. In the 90s, I was using it to record my band and some other bands. But in reality, I mean, it was good, but I'm going to put that in C tier. There were, you know, it certainly wasn't amazing. Let's move on. What's this next one here? Alesis 3630 compressor. I had a few of these because they were cheap. Very, very cheap. At least they were cheap to me, because I had a contact when I was a teenager. I used to work in a guitar shop, and I had a contact at Alesis. I used to be able to get the stuff trade, so I bought a load of them trade for the studio, and I think I was getting them for like 75 quid each or something like that. And they were a very usable compressor. Again, they weren't bad in any way, but they didn't have any superb character that would put them in the S or the A tier. They weren't even just sort of really good, but they were more than usable. So I'm going to put those in the C tier. I'm torn on that because to me, they were really functional and I used them loads, but I've just used so much better stuff since. So I'm going to put that in the B tier. Yeah, B tier. B tier. The Alesis 3630, I'm going to put in the B tier because for me, it was really good. Let's see what comes up next. Oh dear. Behringer Tube Composer. Oh dear. Yeah, I had one of these and I used to use it to put drums through, my drum bus through. And it roughed up the edges a bit with the sort of turning up the valve knobs on it. It had these kind of valve knobs that you could mix in apparently some valve warmth or something into it. And it served its purpose for the time, but I have no romance over it. I have more romantic thoughts about the Alesis 3630 than I do the Behringer Tube Composer. Saying that, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I don't think it's D. I mean, F is a complete fail. D is something that's usable at a pinch. C is kind of good, but, well, usable. It's perfectly reasonable. And I put it in the C tier, to be honest, from what I remember. Next up on the list is the BSS DPR402. There we go. That's from the Retro Gear Shop there. They seem to have one for sale. I've actually got one in the rack down there. I don't use it that often. Not because it's bad. It's actually a very capable compressor. It was used a lot in the live world. I like it, particularly on overheads, because the de-essing, the stereo de-essing, is really nice on it. But these days, the Waves plugin, I must admit, I've done A/B comparisons with the Waves plugin, and the Waves plugin is almost, if not exactly the same in terms of what I want it to do. Do they sound the same? Yeah, I could probably tell them apart, but for what I want it to do, the Waves plugin does it perfectly well, so I don't turn it on much these days. Saying that, back in the day, that was a really useful compressor. I'm going to put that in A tier. Yeah, it's better than the Alesis. If I'm putting the Alesis in B, then I'm putting the BSS DPR402 in A tier because it was a really good, really useful compressor for its time, albeit fairly cheap. I don't know, there's something about it. It's very, very capable, loads and loads of options on it. So the next one is the Drawmer DL241. I've still got one of these in my rack down there. Again, it rarely gets turned on for anything. It really is if I really needed something, I'd use it. I wouldn't say it has huge amounts of character. Saying that, it does sound really nice. It does kind of round out some harshness from the top end if you put particularly electric guitars through it. I find electric guitars, sometimes overheads. It's something that I would probably still use at a pinch, but I've got so much other stuff I'd used before that, which is why I've left it in the rack. It's not left the rack, but it's I don't know, I have a romance about this because really early on, I mean, I'm going back to when I was a late teenager, that was probably the best compressor I had, okay? And everything, vocals and guitars and everything got recorded through that to the tape. So I'm going to put that, for me, I can't put it in the same tier as that. It's in the same tier as the BSS, but are they A tier units? I mean, they're end of A tier units to me, but really they're B tier units, aren't they? But then the Alesis would have to come down to a C tier. Right, I'm moving the Alesis compressor down to a C tier. And I'm moving these two down to a B because there's so much other stuff that's better that needs to go in A. But they were good units. They were good units. Okay, I think we got a compressor coming up. What's this one? The IGS One LA, the 500 series box. I've got two of them there. They are fantastic. Very aggressive, much more aggressive than my Blackline Audio 2As. Yeah, that's going in A tier for me. That is a superb compressor. I love it on bass. I love it on certain drum bits, you know, snare drum, bass drum, snare drum particularly. It just brings out a swell at the bottom. If you've seen my mixing drums video from not that long ago, I used it there. It just sounds fantastic. So yeah, that's going in A tier, which is why these needed to come down to B tier really. So let's have a look here. I've got the SSL, the E-Dynamics. These are good. They're a little bit boring. I'll be honest with you. They're a little bit boring, but they are good. I wouldn't put them in A tier because they haven't got enough character for A tier, and I can get similar sounds out of some of the best plugins that do the E-Dynamics. Saying that, I mean, they're really good classic compressors. I'm going to put that in B tier, which I might get some flack for. I've got 2 of them and they sound great, but other things sound better. The B Dynamics, on the other hand, I am absolutely in love with. Bass drum and snare drum, these are my go-to compressors, and I do want to try them on something else. Now this is, I wouldn't buy any more E Dynamics. Having 2 is enough, but buying 2 more B Dynamics, I definitely do. So I think the B Dynamics I'm putting into A tier, because I think that is wonderful. I'm going to move the SSL a bit further up the list and definitely move the Akai to the end. Let's have a look and see what's next. Okay, the Black Lion Audio 17, which is their 1176 style compressor. It's really, really good. I've got 2 of them, and they're really good for snare drum, really good for bass. I would use them on vocals, but I've got better things for vocals. A snare drum going into that and then into one of the One LAs, the IGS One LAs. It just sounds absolutely awesome. This is a really good compressor with a lot of character. I am putting that into A tier. That is definitely going into the A tier. Yeah, I think that's a good order. Slightly behind the B Dynamics. The next one is another Black Lion Audio unit, the B17-2A, which if you've not seen it in any of my videos or online anywhere, it is a dual compressor. It's got an 1176 style compressor, the 17 side, and an LA2A side. And you can use it as 2 completely independent compressors, or you can feed the signal from one to the other, and basically start with the 1176, come out of the 2A. It does sound awesome. The 2As in it are a little bit more gentle than the IGS One LA 500s, but for the money as well, having an 1176 and a 2A, I mean, I've got 2 of those units, so effectively I've got 4 17s and 2 of their 2As, and that is an A tier. No, I'm going to put that's my first S tier product, because it's got the best of both worlds all in one product, and it does sound absolutely fantastic. So that's my first S tier product. I think they're the first people to put those 2 compressors in one box, and to put them in one box like that means you can just have one thing that's a perfect vocal chain or a perfect snare drum or a perfect bass guitar. It is really good. So yeah, that's my first S tier unit. Black Lion Audio Bluey, the copy of the Chris Lord Algae Bluey compressor, the 1176 compressor. Black Lion Audio made a rack version which copied Chris Lord Algae's one, and then they made the 500 series one. I've heard both, and I've got the 2 500 series ones. I haven't noticed any massive difference, if any difference, between the 2, I'll be honest with you. I think that this is an S tier product. Any vocal I put through that just instantly sounds better. I've used that on every vocal that I've mixed since I've had that, and it's worked just beautifully. It's like a little distortion box, but then when you put the vocal in the mix, you can't hear the distortion. It just sounds rich. It's the most beautiful sound. Also, parallel drum bus compression. It works really well because it's just so aggressive. If you want a really aggressive rock track, using that as a parallel drum bus compression, using 2 of them in stereo, sounds amazing. So yeah, that's my second S tier product. If I had to pick one of the 2, I'd probably still have the B17-2A over that, because it's got the 2A and the 1176. But yeah, that's still an S tier product. Let's look at the next thing. SSL Bus Plus. Now, anyone that's watched this channel for a while knows how I feel about the SSL Bus Plus. It's, up until recently, was what I considered the best compressor I've ever owned and the best unit I've ever owned. There's now one unit that I think is bettering it, but I actually use it in conjunction with the SSL Bus Plus to get the best out of it. So the Bus Plus is still almost always in the chain. I think the Bus Plus is phenomenal. I've talked about it in loads of other videos, so I'm not going to go on about it now. But if you don't have one, you really need to get one. That's another S tier unit. I'm putting that before the Blueies, I think. Yeah, before the Blueies. Okay, so the next one, this is going to be funny. The next thing is the IGS Tubecore 3U. I put out a video, it's not one of my best performing videos actually, where I just did 18 minutes of a drum loop going through that IGS Tubecore 3U compressor. It's a very Mew compressor. It is magnificent. I used that word on the thumbnail and I really mean it. It is magnificent, but you put it over any source. I mean, I've bounced acoustic guitars through it, I've bounced vocals through it, I've bounced synths through it, whole mixes. You just put the whole mix through it. At the end, that's basically what's sitting at the end of my mix bus chain, or third from the end of my mastering chain if I haven't mixed the track and it hasn't already got that on it. It's a life-changing device, and it's the one that's displaced the Bus Plus from my favourite compressor of all time. It just sounds amazing. And everyone that's been around here and heard it has gone, can you also put it through that? Can you put it through that? And we end up just putting everything through that at some point. So yeah, that is an S tier. And not only is it an S tier, but it's going to be an S tier. Have I got to move all these to the end like this? I do. Not only is it an S tier, but it's the first in the S tier. It's the best unit of the lot. In fact, I'm going to put the Bus Plus before the B17-2A. So that goes IGS Tubecore, Bus Plus, B17-2A, and then the Bluey. They're my S tiers so far. Okay, what's next? Right, the Drawmer LX20. I still have one of those. It's sitting up there behind the camera. This is an interesting unit. Very simple to use. I loved this on vocals back in the day. I mean, when I was a lot younger, I'd process vocals to... Actually, no, most of the time I'd record them to the recording with the 241. And then on the way back, I'd process them and hit them really hard with the LX20. And they kind of did a thing that I would say was like a cheap version of what the Bluey did. They distorted a bit, but sounded really cool. They were unbalanced. I say were, they still are unbalanced. Very, very cheap now. And I have one up there. But I don't wire it in because I've got better stuff. But that was a compressor that I absolutely loved. I've got to put that in the C tier, even though I've got a lot of time for that. Because sometimes when I was mixing the box, sometimes I go, why can't I get the same vocal warmth that I got out of that old LX20 out of this plugin? You know, it was nice. Maybe it should be in B tier. Maybe it should be in B tier. No, it wasn't as good as the 241. No, I'm leaving that in C tier for now. Okay. This next one will be controversial. Behringer X32 Producer. I still have one of these. I still use it occasionally for things here or there. Particularly live streams and stuff, because of the amount of different routing that you can do in it, and you can save the scenes, and it's small. And also I take it to rehearsals because I can take a feed off the main mixer and then mix my own headphone send for rehearsals, and also record the multi-track so we can listen back to our mistakes. I've recorded loads of stuff through that. I've used it when I've gone and done gigs, you know, friends, weddings and stuff like that. I've gone and used that thing. They are very good for the money. They are exceptionally good. And I have an M32, which it's based on. I have a Midas M32. And I can't honestly say that I hear massive difference. And it's just been a really useful tool. I know some people really hate them, but just the amount of options, 32 ins and outs in terms of USB. You've got 16 ins with XLR on. You've got 8 XLR outputs. You can plug in the external boxes. You can use the network cable to connect them to other desks. They've got options for MADI and Dante, and you can do scene changes with MIDI. For the money, you can't beat them. I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but that's going in the B tier. That is a B tier unit, just because of how much it does. Sorry, not sorry for that, because I've done a lot of good with that, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. But the next one on the list, the Midas M32, is like the big brother of it, and I have one of those that's currently sitting behind that door over there in a flight case that's going to go in the drum room when I finish getting that sorted out. That's a really nice sounding desk for recording, so I can USB out of that and get all 32 inputs directly into my computer. It does sound possibly marginally better, but blindfolded, I'm not sure I could tell the difference. The noise floor's within about -2 dB of the, it's -2 dB less than the Behringer. Everything else basically works the same. It's a lot nicer to use than the Behringer, but I don't know if it warrants going in A tier. I would say this goes in B tier, but a little bit before the X32. I think I'm going to put the sampler at the end of the B tier there. The M32 is just slightly better than the X32, but they're both, in my opinion, B tier products, which means, let's be honest about what B tier means in this. It means that I'm putting the SSL eDynamics in B tier, okay? So it means it's perfectly usable, perfectly clean, does exactly what it says on the tin, and really good. It just doesn't have, it's not a wow factor sort of character, which would make it A tier. And then the S tier is just, if I use that bit of gear on something, you can see the expression on people's faces. It's just special. The S is for special, So, the M32 and the X32 are perfectly usable and perfectly clean, but they don't belong in A or S. So, and I think if I put the X32 in C, that would be underdoing it. That would put it on the same level as like the Behringer Tube Composer or the 3630 compressor, which I'd much rather be using my X32 than any of them. So yeah, might get some flack for that, but sorry, not sorry. Okay, next, the mixing desk that I had in my studio, Rogue Studios, back in the day was one of these. Someone's actually got the same one, albeit the chassis is a different colour. This was a Soundtracs Megas 32-24-2. I had one of those. It was an absolutely beautiful sounding desk. I mean, it started to get old, started to get crackly. The buttons, when you pushed them in, would crack and disappear, and then you'd end up having to get a pen and turn certain buttons on and off. So, towards the end it was breaking, but it was very old at that point. I mean, it was sort of 20 years old at that point, and everything I ever recorded through those desks, because a lot of the time the mics hit that desk and they were my preamps that then went to, I put in anything in the inserts and then they went to the computer. That desk was just part of the sound of everything I recorded professionally when I had the studio, right from when I was sort of 19 years old right through till sort of 2010, 2011, the last time I was doing any serious amounts of recording. Even the Ozzy Floyd Live in Hammersmith DVD from 2011, the audio for that was mixed through, things were summed through that console and certain bits were brought up on individual channels. So that was a good console. That was both functional, really nice to use, easy to use, sounded great, and it had some character to it. I wouldn't put it S tier, but for me, in my experience with it, that was an A tier console. That was an A tier bit of gear in my life. Maybe if I'd worked on Neves and SSLs and stuff back in the day, I'd be putting it in the B tier. But in my journey, that's an A tier bit of gear. And I even considered getting a smaller one of those for here to track through and put it in the drum room so I could use all the preamps off it, because I loved the sound of that. That's an A tier bit of gear. The next thing, so the Studio Master, the Mixdown Classic 8. This is what I used before we moved to the Megas, and I actually recorded Phil Collins through this desk, which is a story I've teased before and I will tell. But I actually recorded Phil Collins through that desk onto the Fostex G24S tape machine. He was playing drums in a band, playing drums for a band called The Action. And yeah, that was tracked through that. And that, you know, did a perfectly good job. I wouldn't say it had huge amounts of character, but it did a perfectly good job for what we could do at the time with the budget. Where do I put that? That's, in my life, that's a B tier product. That's a B tier product in my life. But coming up next is the SSL Big Six. So good that I bought two of them. My current setup, you can see in the background, has two Big Six consoles. One of which I use mainly for doing drums and percussion, stuff like that. And then the other one gets everything out in groups. But they're so versatile. The compressors built into them sound great. It really is the thing that glues this whole studio together. So yeah, that's an A tier product. It's an A tier product. It's just so good. It's an A tier product to the point where I need to put it as the top of the A tier products. Definitely the top of the A tier products for me. Okay, next up is something that the Focusrite Trackmaster Pro. That was absolutely fucking awful. That thing, that just sounded horrible. So many promises, sounded so shit. That is it's not an F, it's not a fail, it's not unusable. But that's my first D tier product. That was fairly shit, to be fair. And coming up next is another unit, Focusrite Voicemaster Pro. Yeah, what can I say about that? Similar kind of, just lots more shit, but not quite shit enough that it's unusable. In fact, I lent it to a good friend of mine when we were doing some recording, because he had almost nothing to track through, and I just set him up a basic setup that covered him for vocals and acoustic guitar, and it worked. And then I dealt with the signal when I got it here, but I wouldn't say it's something I'd ever recommend. So that's another D tier product. What's up next? Heritage Audio HA81 Elite. This is a Neve type preamp with a 1073 style preamp and a 1081 style EQ. This sounds really good. This does sound really good. I don't like the fact that the knobs seem sort of upside down to me. That's my only real criticism of it. But actually, as a unit, it's really good. Fantastic preamp. I don't think anyone would complain with a vocal recorded through that into the SSL. I'm putting that in A tier. That's an A tier product. I don't think it's quite good enough to be S tier, but it's definitely an A tier product. Next up is the Meek MQ3, and I've actually got another one which basically does the same thing but has got a different product name, the Q1 or something. I can't remember what the name is, but when I would do stuff at home, when I wasn't really recording anyone, when I just needed to put down some vocals on a demo and I wanted something to give my mic phantom power and give me a little bit of EQ and compression, I used that, and it wasn't bad, but it's not something that I ever reach for now. Certainly don't reach for it now. That's a C tier. For what it is, I mean, it's not great, but it's not bad for what it was. It was a cheap unit. Next up on the list, Warm Audio WA273 EQ. So this is an 1173 preamp style with an EQ built in. It's a stereo unit. I've got the stereo unit. They also make a mono unit. I've got a lot of time for this unit. I think a lot of signals, bass particularly, but also electric guitars sound phenomenal going through it. If you just take the preamp up to the point where it's distorting and then take it back a notch, sounds great. I've even put whole mixes through it, to be honest. It does sound really nice. I love putting the 50 hertz shelf in on the bass because it's got a resonant bump and it cuts out all the stuff I don't want in the bass and warms up the bottom end, no end. And something which has been released recently that got mixed in here, I used that on all the bass. I used both channels of it and I printed one back quite saturated and one less so. And then I would either blend between them or choose which one I wanted before I then did frequency split and other bits and pieces on it. But that was the basis of the bass sound, was reprinted all through that, and it sounded great. And actually a lot of the guitars and a lot of the keyboards were reprinted through that as well. I might have used the Heritage audio unit, but I've only got one of those, so stereo stuff went through that, and it just roughed it up nicely. You know, it gave it that kind of transformer noise. It's not an A tier unit. I would put that in a B tier unit because I think there's build quality issues maybe. Sometimes the knobs feel a little bit cheap, and I'm sure if I had another one of the Heritage audio units, I'd probably be using those rather than this, but it's still a very good unit that I use still to this day. And actually on the last thing that we put out that I was involved in that got put out, that was used so much and it sounds great. So yeah, I'd happily recommend that to anyone. What's next on the list? SSL Fusion. Right, yeah, so I've got one of these recently. This is the first thing in my master bus chain, and it does a lot. And if you turn it up too much, it can make things sound horrible. But when you get it right, I don't think it's as good as the Bus Plus. It doesn't excite me as much as the Bus Plus. If I didn't have it and I was just using the Bus Plus and some other things, I think I could achieve similar results. But it's still a really good unit. It's not S tier. I would say is it an A or a B? Oh, it's bottom of the A's or top of the B's for me. I'm going to be nice. I'm going to put it bottom of the A's. Saying that, what else is in my... Yeah, no, I've got two. Behringer stuff's in the A's. So yeah, it's kind of bottom of the A's. Sorry, Behringer stuff's in the B's. So yeah, it's bottom of the A's for me. I got it cheap enough, second hand, that it was worth buying. Had I paid a couple of grand for it compared to, say, the IGS Tubecore that I paid, you know, similar kind of couple of grand for or whatever, the IGS Tubecore is wow factor. If I'd paid £2 for the Fusion, there wouldn't have been the wow factor, but I actually paid about 750 quid, I think. And for 750 quid, that is an A tier bit of gear. So yeah, I think that's good. Right, next. Behringer Magician. I bought one of these second hand off someone who didn't know what it was, and I didn't really know what it was, and I ran signals through it and realised that it didn't do anything I liked, but it had 8 preamp valves in it that were good, because when I had the studio we had rehearsal rooms as well. People would spill drinks in the Marshall heads and you change the preamp valves all the time, and turned out that buying a Behringer Magician was a cheaper way of buying 8 decent preamp valves than just buying 8 decent preamp valves. The other thing as well is I think they still worked as an 8-way DI box, because they had a jack in and XLR out, so you could use them sort of as an 8-way DI box even without the valves in them. So I think at one point I did buy one, take all the valves out, use them, and then still used it as an 8-way DI box. Probably only used 4 of them. Yeah, that thing was shit. That thing wasn't even in its intended form to make signals nice. That thing wasn't even barely usable. That was Absolutely awful. So that's my first fail tier item. Okay, the Symmetrix 511A noise reduction unit. I had one of these at the studio, and I'm looking for one. I actually bid for one on eBay. There's one on eBay. It was for 125 quid, and I did buy it now. And I never heard from the person. I never actually got the unit, and then eBay ended up refunding my money. And I recorded every vocal and every guitar, acoustic, electric, every bass, if we were tracking and doing it sort of one after the other where I could. Everything went through that before it hit the tape, and then up to a point everything went through that before it hit the computer. It was the way it worked, you know, the way it would slowly take the treble off before it closed the gate meant it sounded really natural, and the end of words with S's sounds would just get rounded off if you got the thresholds right on that. And I'd use that kind of before hitting the compressor, usually the DL241 back in the day. And then that would go into the computer. So the chain would have been the old Soundtracs Megas console. And in the insert would have been that first, then the DL241. It would have been EQ'd on the desk. And then that would be sent via the direct out to the computer. And that unit was just on everything. And it didn't have a characterful sound, but it did exactly what it said on the tin, and I really would like another one for here, to be honest. Partly nostalgia, but partly because it's a really good unit. So that's going B tier, definitely going in the B tier. Controversial one coming up. Midas L10. I've got 3 of them, so clearly I don't mind them at all. I put this in, not that it processes the signal, but it holds the things that process the signal. Loads of stuff online about these saying that the power supplies are crap and nothing works, and you get dropouts and low voltages and all that. And there may have been a run years and years ago where that was true, I don't know. But I've bought 3 in the last year, and all of them have been clean as a whistle. Noise floor that's not adding anything to what my audio interfaces are doing already. I'm literally seeing no problems at all. I've sent test tones through them clean, getting everything back perfectly the same. And I've got some power hungry units, particularly the 1LAs, and again, they just work absolutely fine. Very, very functional, does what it says on the tin unit. You know, saying that, it doesn't have any bells and whistles. It's just a functional item that's more than good enough. So that's going in the C tier, not because it's bad, just because it's not something I wow about. It's just a functional item. It does the job, and I kind of forget about it. But yeah, so if anyone's thinking of buying one, you think, oh, I've heard they're noisy. That's not been my experience at all. Right, next up, the Cranborne Audio Carnaby 500 units. I've got 2 of these. The coolest thing of which is the OptoSync, where they sync to each other, so I can use the left-hand one, and it will also be working on the right-hand one, so you can make them stereo EQs without having to match the settings on each. These don't work on everything as an EQ because they're EQing by generating harmonics or taking away harmonics. I'm assuming that's how they do it with the negative dits, or boosting other harmonics around. I don't really know. I haven't really studied them scientifically to see how they're working, but we were doing something the other day where we wanted some low end on a vocal that just wasn't there in the original vocal, and we kind of put these on and dialed in the low end, and it sounded great. And I was also rescuing a recording a friend of mine had, just an MP3 of his old band, and I did a stem split and then was trying to remix it, and I had to basically low pass all the guitars because there was a lot of just shit sound going on in the top end from the MP3 compression, and I used these to kind of create harmonic top end that was, you know, harmonics being taken from the mids and kind of put in at the top end, so almost like an artificial, like an aural exciter almost. And these really did the job, and they were very interesting, and I find them really interesting and really nice to use, but they certainly don't work on everything. They're not just an EQ. I wouldn't just if someone didn't have enough EQ, I wouldn't say, oh, buy 2 of them. It's kind of when you've got enough EQ, then buy 2 of them just for having something to sort out problems for things. But I think they're a really good product. They're almost A tier. Almost A tier. Or top of B tier. No, I'm going to put them at the end of the A tier. They're quite a revolutionary product, and they wouldn't be my first choice necessarily, but they're certainly more useful to me and more interesting than the SSL E Dynamics or the, you know, something like the M32 or the X32 or even the 17, which is a great compressor, but the B17-2A is just better. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to stick with that as an A tier product. Next, the Harrison Audio MR3 EQ. Right, I've got a pair of these, and I need to use them more on different sources. I've been using them on toms, which kind of underuses them. They're really nice at dialing in the low end and the top end for toms, I find, because they've got a nice low shelf, and they've also got a high pass filter. So if you overdo the bottom end, find where it's really booming on the bottom end, and then use the high pass to round that off, you get a nice resonant bump. You can scoop out any offending mids nicely just above where the resonant bump is, and then the top end sounds glorious. I want to use them on other sources, and I just haven't, because I kind of put them on the toms and left them there. I've got a feeling they're a lot better than what I'm using them for. Yeah, I'm going to put them in B tier, but I think I might revisit that at some point. If I used them more, I'd probably say they were A tier. Yeah. Okay, where's Audio Dione? This is fantastic. This is an SSL bus compressor with so many more options, and it's digitally recallable, even though it's all analog. You've got the wet dry mix on it, you've got THD modes on it, you've got A and B, so you can toggle back and forward between settings. There's even a C setting on the plugin, which only controls it. The plugin's not doing any of the audio processing. This is entirely analog, but that is now pretty much permanently on my drum bus. That's back of the S tier. That's an S tier product. Digital. I mean, it's as good as any of these, really. It's maybe not as good as these, but the digital recallable function, I mean, I'd have these over that. Before I'd buy this, I'd buy these, but the digital recall on it, and it sounds amazing. That is yeah, that's an S tier product, definitely. SSL EEQ. I've got two of these that I use mainly for bass drum and snare drum, although I've put vocals through them, I put guitars through them, I've tracked acoustic through them and other things quite a bit. Electric guitars I haven't tracked through them, but I've reprinted stuff through them. I mean, everyone knows the SSL EQ. They've either got plugins on them, or they've heard millions of classic records that use them. They've got the switch on them that allows you to change the modes from the brown to the black version of it. They're just classic. It's an A tier product. It's an A tier product. I'm not going to put it in S, because I could probably use other things and get similar results, but they're just so intuitive and so classic that they've got to go at least A. So yeah, they're not quite up there. I wouldn't buy them before I'd bought the S tier stuff, but yeah, that's I'm looking at the A tier product, the SSL Big Six, whether that should be an S tier, because I just think it's such a fantastic, there's so much built into such a tiny unit. And I don't know what I'd do without them. I'd have to have something that was so much more expensive. I don't think there is another. The only thing that I was looking at, if I wasn't going to have the two Big Sixes, was the Trident. There was a Trident console, and that would cost me like 16 grand or something, to do something that with these two I can get what I want out of it for nearer sort of 4 grand. I've got to put I'm revisiting that. The Big Six is going to A tier just because of the amount of functionality it's got built in, and it's got the ADDA built in, which I use. And the bus compressor in it is really good. Yeah, that's an S tier unit. Sorry for earlier. That shouldn't have been A tier. I apologise, SSL. Make a big 12. We want a big 12 or a big 16. Anyway. SSL UV-EQ. I've got 5 of these. When they came out, they were about £1,000, and nowadays you can buy them second hand for like 270 to 300 quid. And they are fantastic sounding EQs. I mean, you can push that high end and it does not really get harsh, particularly on the 20k setting. You're boosting so much, and the curve it produces just sounds so nice. I use one over my drums, I use one over my bass, I use one over my whole mix, and then I use one before and after compressors for reprinting. They're just great stereo clean SSL quality EQs, and that is an A tier product, not an S tier, but an A tier product. And I've got 5 of them, and I could have more because they're just so useful. Next up, Alesis Midiverb II. Oh yeah, I haven't got one of these now, but I did have a couple of these in the old studio in Rogue. And I forget what the presets were because they come with just presets. You can't really change them. They're not something where you can change the times or whatever. So you just scroll through till you find the preset you like. And I think it was preset 22 for snare drum and toms, and 20 something else, maybe 27, 28 for a longer reverb. I can't remember, but I'm sure the 22 was the snare drum magic, and everyone slagged them off. And then suddenly someone went, oh, why aren't we getting that sound? And it's like, well, we haven't got that crap reverb from the Alesis Midiverb II, which actually, particularly on drums, just makes it kind of sound fat and beefy. And there's something about it. I really loved that unit. It had loads of character. I'm putting that in the B tier. It's certainly not A or S, but it's definitely back end of B tier. As is probably the next one, the Alesis Midiverb 4, which I've got several of these. I've got one of them in the rack in here, and I sometimes use it for a bit of drum verb, or if I'm tracking vocals, I can put a bit of reverb on vocals through it, and it's fairly functional. But I actually use them live in my guitar rig. So I've got 3 of them, one in the rig and then one in my B rig and one as a spare. And I have them set permanently on a 100% mix slow Leslie. So it does all of the movement, the chorus movement of a Leslie speaker, and it does it really well without colouring it. So all the other Leslie simulators that I've used try to add in the distortion of the preamp that would be driving the Leslie. And if I'm going into amps, which I am on stage, I'm going into 2 Supro amps, I don't want that drive that you get from the Leslie. I just want the movement, because the amps are going to do the EQ shaping and the valviness and all of that. And this does it brilliantly. And I have it in an effects loop of my Boss rack unit. And if I want to mix in, I can just mix in a bit of that Leslie into the final signal before it goes left and right to my 2 amps on stage. And I've tried all sorts of other things, and it sounds brilliant. It really does sound good for that. So I sort of do buy them up secondhand, because I never want to run out of them for that one purpose. But I've got one in here which is another spare that I bought in case my live rig went down, but I am using it and it's perfectly functional. I wouldn't say it's as classic as the Midiverb 2 in terms of the sound. It's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more generic. But for me, it does that one job that I love. So for me, I'm putting that in a B tier. If it was a Lexicon or something, it would be A or S, probably S. But no, that is a B tier unit for me. So next is the Aphex Oral Exciter Type 3 unit. It's a really old one that I had at the studio. And you know what? Anything I plugged into it, it just made it sound shit. It just was horrible and harsh and had too much top end. And so many people like these, but it was absolutely rubbish for me. I don't know if mine was broken, but that was nonsense. I can't put it in F because it did do what it said on the tin, but it's not something I ever liked or respected. And maybe I'm just too young to understand it because I didn't spend enough time on tape, maybe. And I know to people that never recorded on tape because they came in on a door, I'm probably an old man talking about recording on tape. But to other people who are a lot older than me, they probably remember those units in the 80s or whatever and go, oh, they were amazing. They solved so many problems. But to me, they were just fairly shit. So that is going into the D tier. So next up, oh, who didn't back in the day have a pair of Yamaha NS10s? I don't know. I think I had the NS10Ms actually because they could go on their side. I hated these. Although I must say, upon reflection, I did some good mixes through them. But I hated them. And I sold them to my friend Paul Reeve, who produced a few Muse albums and continued to be their vocal producer, maybe still is, and he's worked with Supergrass, loads of other people. And yeah, I sold them to him because he really wanted them, and I was really pleased to get rid of them. I couldn't stand them, but they're also really good. People really swear by them. For me personally, on my journey, they're not D list, C list for me. I'm putting them on the C list because I just never got on with them. I just didn't like them. Maybe if I'd used them with the sub, people weren't doing that kind of thing back in those days. So next, Alesis Monitor 1s, the old Alesis Monitor 1s, the passive ones. I preferred these to NS10s, which may be just the ignorance of youth. I haven't got a pair of either here to listen to, so I can't, with my more trained ear and older mind, listen and go, Dave, you're a dickhead. But at the time, I preferred them to the NS10s. I'm putting them in B list. In my journey, they were part of the B list. Alesis Monitor 1 Mark IIs. These are the active speakers. I bought a pair of them hoping for home, actually, hoping they would be as good as the passive ones, and they really weren't. They're not D tier, but they're C tier. I'll put them with the NS10s. I did some good mixes on them, but I always needed to check on other things. They weren't good enough on their own, by any means. Okay. Alesis Monitor 2s. I've still got a pair of these in here. Not because they're the best speakers in the world, but just because I've had them since I was so young that I just know the sound of them inside out. And I've actually got 4 pairs of them because I would buy them up second hand because I probably know the sound of these speakers better than any other speaker because I've been doing demos and mixes on them since I was probably 16 or 17. And I took them to Rogue Studios, and I had another pair at home in my home studio in my 20s. So for me, they're a big part of the journey. Saying that, they're certainly not speakers that I'd say if I was buying stuff brand new now that I would seek out, but there's a nostalgia about them for me. For me, they're A tier because I've just done so much on them. For anyone else, they would be B or C. But if I put the Monitor 1s, the passive Monitor 1s in B tier, which I'm going to stand by because they're better than the NS10s, then I've got to put these, for my experience and in my journey, I've got to put them in the A tier, even though other people just would not agree. But I know them inside out and I love them. Behringer Truths. I had a pair of these. I don't think I bought them. I think I borrowed them and had them for about a year at home. And I did mix a whole album with them, using them and the Monitor 2s. Because my near-field monitors broke. Oh, God. They were bad. I mean, they were usable, but they were bad. D tier. D tier for those. I'm afraid they were better than the Magician, which did no magic at all. But you know, I'd rather have had NS10s or the Monitor 2 Mark Monitor One Mark IIs, which is what broke, which is why I needed the Truths. But yeah, the top end on that was just horrendous. Worse than the NS10s. Right, here's the room correction thing, the Arc Studio room correction box. I'm running 2 of these, one over the Monitor 2s and one over my Yamaha setup. They're C tier. They're C tier. B tier. It's B tier because it's not got any character. Perfectly good, perfectly functional, does exactly what I want it to do. And it does do the job very well. But it doesn't excite me in any way. But they've definitely helped out. Those 2 units have definitely helped out, smooth out a few bits. In fact, in this room, there was nothing much more than a dB out when you look at the curve it produced. But I like them. They're functional units, but I could live without them. But they're definitely better than, you know, a Behringer compressor, Alesis 3630 and some of these other bits. I'd rather have a cheapest pair of speakers room corrected with those than work on a pair of Alesis. I mean, the Alesis might sound good with those, I don't know. Yeah, it's a boring product, but room correction is really important. If you can't hear what you're doing properly, then yeah, so I'm putting that as a B tier product. I'll review all this at the end. The Alesis IO2 Express. I had one of these for recording. I had one of these for taking on the road when I first joined Aussie Floyd. I bought it quick. It was the only thing in a shop. I was like, oh, I just need to grab something quick. It's when back in the days when online orders still took a while. And it was dreadful. It was awful. It hissed. It didn't change. From what I remember, it didn't even change sample rate properly. It was 44.1 and then the driver up sampled it to 48k, but it was still fundamentally at 44.1. It kind of cheated the 48k mode, and there was so much crosstalk and so much hiss on it. It was absolutely fucking awful. I mean, to the point where I'd say it's almost wasn't usable. I did use it, and it was usable for a couple of things, but no, that's an F tier product. That was awful. That was awful. Behringer UMC 1820. This is their 8 in and out unit that also has digital I/O with spiff diff and ADAT optical in and out. Now, I had one of these not so long ago when I started building what became this setup when I was in my last house. I had one of these purely to just transmit 8 channels of ADAT. So I wasn't using any of the preamps on it, and I wasn't using any analog outputs or anything on it. Purely was just being used for digital I/O. And then when I bought more of that, I bought the RME Digiface, which we'll come to, so that I had more ADATs in and out. And then I sold that to a friend of mine who's using it. He's using it in his setup to basically power a surround sound, a 5.1 setup that he's got, or he's building, should I say. But you know what? It was clean as a whistle. It was, you know, you don't want to turn it up and clip it. You weren't going to get any nice sounds out of it. But I ran test tones and pink noise and all sorts of stuff through it to see how bad it was, you know, and how bad Behringer have got with their latest kind of cheap interfaces. And honestly, that thing is perfectly usable. If someone went into a rehearsal room with some decent mics, put them in a good place with a well-tuned kit, recorded 8 mics through that and sent me the drums to mix, you know what, I could do a good job with it. I never used it for that. So, but saying that, I mean, I've used the X32 to record drums that I've ended up mixing. And they've been perfectly fine. Yeah, I mean, this is a C tier product. It's certainly not the best out there, but it also, I mean, one thing that I like about it is it's just class compliant with the Mac, so it doesn't really require any extra software. There's nothing there's no kind of mixing software that needs to be updated or whatever, or firmware inside it that needs updating. So in the future, that's still going to work. You know, I've got audio interfaces, we're going to come to them. I've probably still got a couple of them that just do not work anymore because they're too old to work with Mac or too old to work with Windows 10 or 11. That thing will still be working in 20 years' time. I'm certain of it. So yeah, that's a C-tier product because it's not that interesting. But C is the level where I'd still use it and consider it perfectly acceptable to use, because I've got things that I use like the Midas L10 and you know, like the Alesis ADATs. They were perfectly usable for the job that they had. They just weren't amazing, or they're boring, like the Midas L10. So yeah, I'm putting that in C tier. But coming up next is the ADA8000. This was a unit that basically had 8 XLR and 8 jack-ins with phantom power, and it would just capture signals to ADAT. And it was fairly clean, and I did loads of external recording. They were the kind of things that you'd grab. You'd have your posh interfaces, of which I had 16 ins and outs of. And if I needed more, and I didn't have enough preamps on the desk that I was traveling with, and I didn't have enough in rack form, you just whack a couple of those in spare to take extra bits and pieces, and they were always fine. You know, they were fine. They weren't special, but they weren't bad. They weren't noisy. They weren't unusable in any way. In fact, there's songs I've mixed on this channel that were entirely recorded through that, all the 24 ins and outs we did entirely through 3 of those. Yeah, I remember being told by a friend of mine who worked for the BBC that for Glastonbury around that time when they were popular, the BBC just had loads of them spare, just to chuck in and have extra preamps should they need them for the outside broadcast trucks. That's a C-list item. It was functional, did the job at the time. I mean, could you get better? Yeah, but for the money, and you could buy 3 of them, and if it broke, I mean, all mine broke. They weren't built very well. But for the money, you could buy 3 for the same price as the next thing up. So, yeah, not too bad. Next thing, the Focusrite 26IO. This thing was a nightmare. Sounded absolutely fine. It was perfectly clean and actually very good sounding unit. You know, the dynamics on it sounded nice. And it had room to expand to do 24 ins, so I could use 2 other ADAT units to go into that. Yeah, perfectly good unit, but it was a nightmare. The firewire would just lose connection randomly all of the time, and I had 2 of them so that I could use it for live recording, so I could have 48 ins and outs and basically take 48 things, which is why I had 2 of the ADA8000. So I basically get my first 24 would be one of those and 2 other interfaces. I think they were the RME interfaces, and then I had another one of those, and obviously the least important stuff would be left for the Behringers. But I found I couldn't use them for live recordings reliably enough because they would disconnect, and I was quite disappointed. I used them quite a lot at home in my home studio that kind of was just for me messing around, because I had the studio in Bermondsey, Rogue Studios, so I used them at home. And then at some point, I think some driver updates did stabilise them, because towards the end of me being involved in Rogue Studios, maybe 2010 to 2013, we actually did use this in our system to add some more I/O, and it was more stable then. But I bought them quite a bit before that, and they certainly weren't stable, and they weren't stable with a laptop or... So they were functional in the right circumstance, but they weren't good. But they sounded nice. I'm going to put them in D tier though, because they give me shivers. I had this little Focusrite 2 I/O box, Focusrite Saffire 6 USB. So I think it had 6 outputs, but only 2 inputs, or maybe there were 4 inputs. 2 at the back, 2 in the front, and then 6 outputs. I can't remember what the 6 referred to. That was a fairly functional box, but it was a little bit hissy for my liking. but it was functional. I'll put that in the C tier. Not very interesting. It ended up being my MIDI in and out box for a while until eventually one day it broke. Ferrofish Pulse 16. Right, I've got one of these at the moment in my setup doing hardware inserts. Perfectly functional unit. Sounds perfectly good. That makes it a B tier product. It's not exciting, but it's a perfectly good B tier product, like the M32 and the X32 and all of those. Sounds fine. Can't tell any difference between that and any of my other decent I/O. Right, this unit I've got here, yes, the Native Instruments Complete Audio 6. I use this now. Basically, I use that for my MIDI in and out, and that's all I use it in here for. That does my MIDI in and out. But I do take it away with me on tour. This tour probably be the first time I'm not taking it away, because I've bought myself an SSL 12 that hasn't turned up yet. But in the past, I've taken that on tour. If I've done a video in my hotel room, I've had my Neumann mic plugged into it. I will be using the headphones out on it. I've done vocal takes through it. It's easy to use. It's never crashed, never had any problems with it. It's a very easy to use, friendly unit that does what it says on the tin. And yeah, it's more pleasant. It's no hiss or annoyances or anything like that. And it's certainly kind of, I think, a little bit better quality, a little bit richer, although I can't quantify that, than some of these other ones that I put in the C list. So I'm going to put that in the B tier for what it is. It's just a simple interface, but I think it's got 4 outputs as well, which is useful. I've definitely used this for listening to the video server on tour as well, and getting MIDI timecode out when I'm trying to sync stuff. It's just a good usable interface that can be thrown in a bag and it's never broken. So also, I mean, I have a rucksack and I chuck stuff like that in the rucksack. I'm not looking after this stuff in any proper way. So B tier for that. Oh, here we go. The Hammerfall, RME Hammerfall, Project Hammerfall cards. These were PCI cards that took 24 ins and outs. So this is what I was using back at Rogue Studios to get my ADAT signals in and out from my I/O, my DA/AD converters, or AD/DA converters, should I say. They were solid as a rock, absolutely solid as a rock. Character, interest level, you know, you install them, they work, you don't touch them. So they're not A or S, but they are B tier purely because they're perfectly usable. And if PCI was still a thing, I'd probably still be using them today. But nowadays, I have this thing to do my ADATs in and out, which is the Digiface USB, which gives you 32 channels at 48K, or a 96K you can get 16 channels in and out. And I have them connected up to the Ferrofish and another unit, which I'm going to get to in a minute because it's in the list. And this is a perfectly usable unit. The only complaint I have is it really hates being used with a USB hub. With my Mac, with all the Thunderbolt outputs, if I don't plug it directly into one of those, if I try and go via one of the many different types of hubs, and I've tried all different model hubs, it really doesn't like it. And that is annoying. So if anyone's got a tip to sort that out, let me know, because I really don't like using one of my 3 Thunderbolt sockets on there just for the hardware inserts. I'd much rather put it in a hub, considering it's USB 2 as well, so it should be able to work on a good USB 3 hub, you know. The SSL Big Sixes do, and the Native Instruments thing does. So yeah, that's my only complaint about it, is I can't get it working with a hub. But it's perfectly functional, it's perfectly good. It was cheaper than buying 3 of those Behringer units, which was at the time the cheapest way to get ADAT signal in and out was that Behringer box if you just wanted one in, one out. But that does annoy me. So B tier or C tier. It's going in C tier because that annoys me. Perfectly functional. No problems with it at all other than that. So that can be moved up to B if someone can tell me how I can sort that out. Next one, the MADI face. So I used to use this to record live gigs when gigs and everything went over to MADI, and all our desks, monitor desk and front of house desk, was running on MADI. I would record live gigs through one of these. Perfectly functional thing, worked every time, never any problems with it. That is a B tier unit. Not very exciting, but perfectly professional, perfectly good. So these, the RME Nuendo 8IO analog to digital, digital to analog converters. I had 2 of these, and I've still got one. One of them is down there, making up the other 8 of my 24 ins and outs to do hardware inserts. So I've got the Ferrofish doing 16, and I've got this doing the other 8 if I'm running at 48k, which most of the time I am. Perfectly clean. And these were bought in 2001. I bought these. I know where the other one is, and that's still working. This one's still working. And it sounds as good when I run test tones and pink noise and do comparisons with other interfaces. It still stands up as being equally as good as any of those. The only thing that's slightly different about it compared to the Ferrofish is there's a tiny bit, there's about a millisecond, a bit more latency inherently within it, which I'd expect for a unit that's 24 years old. But quality-wise, it's really good, and they were very expensive at the time. They were like real top-end stuff back in the day when I bought them. At least in my world, you know, with my budget, they were well over $1,000 each. And yeah, and the fact that I'm still using it today, I mean, that's a B tier product. That's a B tier product. It's not character, and I could use something else and whatever, but it stood the test of time. And it's been bumped around and moved with me from property to property and not screwed properly in flight cases and whatever, and it's still working perfectly. Okay, the 4-input version of the 8-way Behringer, the UMC 404. I still have one of these. I bought this a while back when I was doing a certain bit of podcasting, and I basically take around 4 57s with windshields and have that, and I plug the 4 57s in, and you could get 4 people around a table and do a podcast. And it was perfectly good. For that job, it worked perfectly well. And then since then, I have sometimes used it for MIDI in and out. I've also used it for effects in and out when I've been doing something and I've needed to run a couple of different reverbs, and I've got a separate computer because I'm working in analog, and I've got a separate computer running reverbs, and I need to center them, get the reverb out and put them back into the Descom channels. I've used that unit to do some reverb ins and outs before. Perfectly functional, perfectly clean. And for the money, for the job I bought it for the podcasting thing, and obviously I've got the SSL 12 coming now, so I will be using that for that kind of thing, which is definitely better. I'm sure it is. I mean, I haven't got it yet, but I would imagine it's definitely better, and certainly the routing options in it are going to be really good. But I wouldn't be chucking the SSL 12 in my bag if I was just getting on a train to go and do something quick, you know, a few mics in my bag and chuck something in there. I'd be a little bit more protective over the SSL 12 because it's way more expensive. That thing, I'd just chuck in my bag with no protection and it would still work at the other end. And if it didn't, I wouldn't care too much other than that my session would be ruined. But I'll put that in C tier. That's a C tier device. Same as its bigger brother. But more usable than the bigger brother because it can be USB powered and it's smaller. So there we go. Behringer DI box. How do you get the signals in? Well, sometimes you need to DI things. And I have 2 of these Behringer DI boxes, which have 2 DIs in each. And they are one of the worst DI boxes I've ever used. I don't know why I've still got 2 of them. They're just sitting up there and I've just carried them around place to place. And I haven't used them for years. At a pinch, if I had to, I'd use them. But they do not sound good. They do not sound good in any way. They're not totally unusable. They're not like these F tier things, but that's a D-list product. But I've still got 2 of them, and I don't know why. I think it's because at a glance I keep thinking they're my cable testers, which is why I don't throw them away. But I promise you, I have not connected anything up to them in 8 years. IK Multimedia Z-Tone Buffer DI. So if I'm recording DI'd guitar or bass or anything mono that's that kind of instrument level signal, I use this thing. That was a game changer getting that. Made my guitars, when I'm using software guitar plugins, you know, like Amplitude. That thing. In fact, people often write to me on my YouTube videos where I'm playing guitar, and they'll say to me, what was your recording chain? I'm plugging mine into my Focusrite and it doesn't sound the same. And I say, get yourself the Z-Tone Buffer DI. There's a used one there, 76 quid on Reverb. Toman there, 113, brand new. Yeah, that was a game changer for me, because I was using other DIs that were meant to be impedance matched to guitars, but that thing, and also the passive and active circuitry emulation and the boost. So sometimes I'd set it so it was right for my Les Paul, and then I'd put the boost on and dial in how much more I wanted for a Strat or a Telecaster. So then if I was playing something with single coils that was weaker, I could just whack on the boost and keep a nice level, and I wasn't having to change my gain on the desk or whatever. Yeah, really good unit, that. Really fucking good. I'm going to put that in A tier, because that was such a game changer for my DI'd guitar sound. It actually changed the sound and brought out character that I was missing, that I didn't even know I was missing when I was DIing things. Even not through the Behringer, obviously, the Behringer DIs, but that, yeah, no, that's really good, that unit. Right, this Clark Technic DI, not the modern Clark Technic, the Music Tribe Clark Technic, a really old one. I mean, I think this was from the 90s. It says 93 here. I don't know if this goes back that far. But back when Clark Technic were sort of good. And I've got one of those DI boxes somewhere. Where is it? It's up there somewhere, or over here somewhere, I don't know. But I've got one of those, and actually it's a pretty good DI box. That is a pretty good DI box. It's not in the Z-Tone league, but it was what I was using before the Z-Tone. And the Z-Tone definitely sounded better, but this is way better than the Behringer, and I would still use this every day over a lot of other sort of cheap DI boxes. But I don't think it's the best DI box you can get out there. There's probably a load that should be in B tier that I just don't own, because I don't need them, because I can either go straight in my desk or use the Z-Tone or something else, or I use the preamps and whatever, the Warm Audio or the Heritage Audio preamp. But as a DI box goes, I think I'm going to put that C tier. It's perfectly functional. I think there's a lot of other stuff that we use live that I can't remember the name of, that aren't mine, which are better than that. And I had a 4-way one at Rogue that I can't remember the name of, but that was good. That would have been probably B tier, but this is a C tier, perfectly functional. Okay, Line 6 Pod Pro. Got one of these back in 2004 because I got a endorsement somehow through Line 6 because of all the Deep Purple stuff I was doing. And yeah, I got a Line 6 endorsement, and it was that's the Pod Pro. I want the Pod XT Pro. I think it was a Pod XT Pro I had. Yeah, it's one of these things. And I also had the Kidney Beam one, which was functionally the same unit. And this is what I used from 2004 to 2010, 2011. That was what I used as my main guitar DI at the studio. So I actually, although sometimes I did use the sounds from it, quite a lot of the time I didn't. Quite a lot of the time the guitar went into it and I had it on tuner mode with just a straight pass through, and then the XLR out would go into the RME Nuendo 8IO units, and I would set the level with that. So it basically ended up as just a guitar DI. That was all it did. They weren't bad. They weren't good. They weren't awful. C-tier product. For its time, it was all right. I don't know that I'd use it now for any guitar tones, but I think it was a perfectly reasonable DI box and tuner. I'm doing it down. I've done plenty of guitars through that, and it sounded fine, but nothing to write home about. The last thing in my list, which is something very dear to my heart, is the Maplin Eckorder. So if you are not from the UK, there was a chain of like electronics shops, stores, whatever you choose to call them, called Maplin, and Maplin sold a lot of electronics, a lot of guitar-y things, a lot of circuits you could buy and components and little boxes you could drill out, make your own whatever. I made my own first little mixing desks and all sorts of stuff with them. They made, this was either came I think as a kit or as a pre-built delay unit. I bought one in a kit and I bought a second one second hand later on. I've got them sitting over there. There are two of them. And analog delay, you can get all the, you know, you can twist the knob and get all the filthy analog delay stuff. They were less fiddly to do that with than the little pedals, so I really like them for that. And it was the first thing in the chain in my live guitar rig back in my late teens and all through my 20s. So the first thing in the chain would be that. My guitar would go into the -20 and I'd whack the volume up full and I'd hit a chord and the peak level would go on. So I was clipping the signal in whatever transistor or transformer, I imagine it's a transistor in there. So my signal was getting clipped analog style by one of these shitty Maplin Echo boxes, and then I had a foot switch which would engage it, so it wasn't on, it was just going out into all my other guitar effects and then into the amp. And then I had a non-latching foot switch to it, so if I wanted to go you know, and get one of those great delay effects, I could walk up to my amp, it was on top of my amp, and I could just put my foot on the thing and it would start repeating the note. I could start going and then I could like strum all my guitar strings open and let off and it would be a big feedback noise. But that was first thing in the chain, and that was clipping, so that was like my first level boost before it went to my effects, which were mainly just a series of boosts. So I did have a delay and I had a phaser within the lot and I had a wah pedal. But then, because it was a multi-effects box, but then my two overdrives were actually just boosts. They were like 20 dB boost each one. And then I went into the low input of my JCM 800, which had been modified anyway. So it was basically just driving the preamp of a single channel JCM 800 really hard. And I'd just push more and more and more level. And then if I wanted to clean it up and didn't want the Maplin box to distort, I'd just pull my volume back a bit, and I basically have like 4 gain stages with those, and then that would be first in the chain to do my sort of analog delay tricks, which I was enjoying. And I love that unit, and it's still got a sound to it. And if you know, I've got 2 of them there, and one day I'm going to connect them up for a mix and sort of dial in slightly different delay times on the left and right and use it on vocals or something for analog delay. And purely because how much joy that unit has brought me and how beautifully analog it sounded and how much it was in every single one of my guitar recordings from about age 18 to age 26. That is going in the S tier because it's my list and I want it to go there. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been entertaining. It's been fun for me, a bit nostalgic. There's probably tons of gear that I've owned. I'm already thinking of some that I've forgotten to put in the list, but tough. If I didn't remember them when I was doing the list, then they didn't make it. So if you like this video, let me know. Leave me a comment. If you disagree with me, leave me a comment. If you agree with me, leave me a comment. Also, tell me if you enjoy me doing this, because I might do one for all the microphones that I have owned, and I might do one for all the guitars that I've owned, which, man, that would be a long session, because I've got 67 odd guitars now, and I've probably had 20 others that I've bought and sold. So yeah, that would take some doing. But yeah, I think that's fair. This describes my journey with these pieces of equipment. It's not subjective in any way, and I'm not apologising for that. By the way, thanks for putting me over 8,000 subscribers. I didn't do an 8,000 subscriber video. I was going to, but then I actually got busy working in here. Believe it or not, I got some audio work. This isn't just a YouTube set. I actually do some audio work from time to time. And unfortunately, that stopped me being able to make videos for a couple of weeks. But very proud of some of the results that I was getting out of those particular jobs. And some of you know I am one of the guitarists, play guitar and sing in the Australian Pink Floyd show. And recently we released our video on YouTube in 4K of Dark Side of the Moon, the whole album, start to finish. That was filmed back in 2023 with all my Blackmagic cameras over 3 different shows. I got some people in because obviously I was on stage, so I couldn't actually do the camera work. 3 very good friends came in and did that. I edited it all and I put together a mix. Steve found a member of Aussie Floyd, came down with me here. In fact, he was here last week and we did final tweaks on the audio. He'd listened to stuff and given me lists of little bits that he wanted tweaked, and we did do a remote session with him listening via a plug-in, so he could get it was sort of almost, I wouldn't say real time, but he could actually listen to what I was doing, and I was sharing my screen. We did the mix like that, but lots of that got reprinted through all of this stuff and, you know, was done in a hybrid way. If you like Pink Floyd, and I know not everyone in my audience is going to like Pink Floyd, but if you like Pink Floyd, please go and check that out, because not only am I really proud of the editing of the video and the cameras look great, but the band sounds awesome. Everyone in the band sounds awesome. We were really on it. That audio track was, I think, mostly from Glasgow, which is one of our biggest arena gigs, about 7,000 people. And we got all the long shots of the video from Glasgow, and it looks awesome. And I am so proud of the result of it, both audio-wise and video-wise. So if you like Pink Floyd, please go and check that out. And yeah, keep in mind that was kind of done here. So if you want a mix done by me, I've got the gear and you can hear something that I've done that I'm really pleased with. Yeah, I think that just about wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye.